I am Riley, 33 years old, and the morning after my brother's lavish Malibu wedding, I woke up to find $250,000 wiped from my bank account. My mother sat across the kitchen island, sipping a latte, entirely unbothered, as she told me I was young enough to earn it back. I did not scream or cry. Instead, I set down my plate of eggs and realized my family was about to learn a very hard lesson about federal tax law. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to teach a toxic family member that your silence is not a weakness. The morning sun was pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the rented Malibu estate. The house was a sprawling, modern masterpiece, with an infinity pool overlooking the Pacific Ocean. It was the perfect backdrop for my brother Jason and his new wife Kendra to celebrate their union. Kendra was a luxury art broker who demanded nothing but the finest things, and Jason, whose tech startups consistently failed, was desperate to maintain the illusion of being a wildly successful executive. I was sitting at the massive marble kitchen island, enjoying the quiet before the rest of the house woke up. I opened my laptop and logged into my banking application. My goal was simple. I needed to pay the final invoice for the wedding caterer. I had already contributed more than my fair share to this wedding, but it was never enough for them. I typed in my password expecting to see my usual balances. Instead, a glaring zero stared back at me from my primary checking account. I refreshed the page, assuming it was a glitch. The number did not change. I clicked on the transaction history and felt the air leave my lungs. A wire transfer for $240,000 had been initiated and cleared just hours ago. The destination was an escrow account I did not recognize. My mother, Brenda, walked into the kitchen wrapped in a plush silk robe. She hummed a cheerful tune as she walked over to the espresso machine. She poured herself a cup, added exactly 2 sugars, and turned to face me. She took a slow sip, a satisfied smile playing on her lips. "Good morning, Riley," she said brightly. "You are up early." I turned my laptop around so the screen faced her. "Someone hacked my account," I said, my voice dangerously calm. $240,000 is gone. I need to call the fraud department immediately." My mother did not gasp. She did not reach for her phone. She simply took another sip of her coffee and walked over to the island, taking a seat across from me. "Do not be so dramatic, Riley," she said, waving her manicured hand dismissively. "Nobody hacked anything. I transferred the money last night while you were asleep." I stared at her, my mind struggling to process her words. "You what?" I asked, keeping my tone perfectly level. "I used that old joint account access," she explained, entirely unashamed. "You remember the one we set up when you were 18 for your college expenses? I am still listed as a primary signer on that profile. I saw all that money just sitting there doing nothing. Jason needs a $200,000 down payment for a new house in Calabasas. He has to impress Kendra's elite art world friends. You know how important appearances are in her industry. The other 40,000 went to covering the rest of the wedding vendors." She looked at me as if she had just explained a simple recipe, not confessed to stealing $250,000. "You stole my money to buy Jason a house?" I stated, stripping away all emotion from my voice. "Oh, stop using such ugly words," she scoffed, rolling her eyes. "It is family money. Jason is building a future, a legacy. You are 33, single, and you just sit behind a computer all day looking at spreadsheets. What do you even need that much cash for? You are still young. You will earn it back." The sheer audacity of her statement hung in the air between us. For my entire life, Jason had been the golden child. He was allowed to fail, to lie, and to manipulate while I was expected to fund his mistakes. My parents constantly drained my resources to prop up his fragile ego. But this was different. This was not a few $100s or a co-signed lease. This was life-altering money. What my mother did not know, and what Jason was too arrogant to ask about, was the true nature of my job. I did not just look at spreadsheets. I was a forensic accountant, and that account she so casually emptied was not my personal savings. I looked at my mother, noting the smug satisfaction radiating from her posture. She expected me to cry. She expected me to beg or to throw a tantrum so she could call me hysterical and justify her actions. I did none of those things. I simply closed my laptop with a soft click. "You have until 5 this evening to return every single cent," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that commanded the room. My mother laughed loudly, tossing her head back. "Or what, Riley? What are you going to do? Ruin your brother's honeymoon? You are so selfish." I stood up, picked up my empty coffee mug, and walked it to the sink. I did not raise my voice or show a single ounce of fear. I turned back to look at her one last time before leaving the kitchen. "I am not going to do anything, Mom," I replied softly. "But the federal government will." Before my mother could even register the weight of my words, the kitchen doors swung open. In walked Jason and Kendra, looking like a spread from a luxury lifestyle magazine. They were practically glowing with post-wedding bliss. Jason was wearing a crisp linen shirt unbuttoned just enough to show off his tan, and Kendra looked flawless in a silk resort wear set that probably cost more than my first car. But what immediately caught my eye was the heavy, gleaming metal resting on both of their wrists, matching solid gold Rolex watches. "Well, good morning to the early birds," Jason announced, walking over to kiss my mother on the cheek. He did not even look at me. "Mom, that caterer was incredible. The caviar bar was an absolute hit with Kendra's clients." Kendra glided over to the espresso machine, her eyes sweeping over me with practiced condescension. I was wearing my usual travel attire, a simple tailored navy suit I had bought off the rack years ago. It was practical, professional, and entirely invisible to someone who lived and breathed high-end fashion. "Riley, you are already in a suit?" Kendra sighed, her tone dripping with fake pity. "We are in Malibu. It is the day after my wedding. You really need to learn how to turn off the spreadsheets and live a little. You cannot take all those pennies to the grave with you. Stop hoarding your money and buy yourself something nice for once. Maybe a personal stylist." I looked at the heavy gold watch sliding down her wrist as she reached for a coffee mug. I wondered exactly how many of my clients' federal tax dollars went into financing that particular piece of jewelry. "I am afraid my budget is a bit tight this morning, Kendra," I said smoothly. "Because your husband and my mother decided to empty my bank account while I was sleeping." Jason let out a loud, exasperated groan, leaning back against the marble counter. "Oh, come on, Riley. Are we really doing this right now? Mom told me she was going to move some funds around. It is a family account. I needed to lock down the Calabasas house before another buyer swooped in. You know my startup is about to close a massive Series A funding round next month. I will pay you back with interest. Stop being so dramatic." He waved his hand exactly the way my mother had, completely dismissive of the fact that he had just committed felony theft. He genuinely believed that because he was the golden child, the rules of the real world simply did not apply to him. "There is no funding round, Jason," I said, staring directly into his eyes. "You have defaulted on your last 3 business loans, and that was not a family account. I need $240,000 wired back into my account by 5 o'clock this evening. If the funds are not there, I will not be the one coming after you." Before Jason could formulate a lie to defend his failing business, heavy footsteps echoed from the hallway. My father Thomas marched into the kitchen. He had clearly heard the tail end of the conversation, and his face was flushed red with anger. He did not ask what was going on. He did not ask for my side of the story. He immediately went on the offensive to protect his only son. My father slammed his fist down on the marble island. The coffee cups rattled. "That is enough," he bellowed, pointing a thick finger in my face. "You are not going to stand here and harass your brother on his honeymoon. Jason just got married. He is building a future for this family. All you do is count other people's money and complain." I did not flinch. I did not blink. I just looked at the man who was supposed to protect me, watching him fiercely defend the son who was robbing me blind. "I am not complaining, Dad," I replied evenly. "I am giving him a deadline." My father sneered, his face inches from mine. "You listen to me very carefully, Riley. If you ruin this weekend, if you make one more threat about this money, I will call my lawyer on Monday morning and write you out of my will entirely." You will not see a single dime of my estate. Do you understand me? The threat was supposed to break me. It was the ultimate weapon he had used to control me my entire life. But looking at Jason's smug grin and my parents' angry faces, I felt absolutely nothing. I knew the truth about my father's estate. He was drowning in debt, taking out second mortgages to fund Jason's failed ventures. There was no inheritance to lose. I understand perfectly, I said. Without another word, I picked up my laptop. I carefully slid it into my leather travel bag and zipped it shut. I slung the bag over my shoulder, grabbed my car keys, and walked toward the door. I did not look back. Let them enjoy their matching watches and their stolen caviar. The countdown had already started. My hand was inches from the heavy brass handle of the front door when the sharp vibration of my phone broke my stride. I paused, pulling the device from my coat pocket. The screen displayed a toll-free number I knew intimately. It was the corporate fraud division of my primary banking institution, a direct security line reserved exclusively for high-net-worth enterprise accounts and corporate clients. I did not step outside. Instead, I slowly turned around on the hardwood floor facing the kitchen one last time. My family was already returning to their celebratory banter, dismissing my departure as a temper tantrum. Jason was pouring another shot of espresso, and my father was clapping him on the shoulder, praising his fictitious business acumen. My mother was admiring her reflection in the dark glass of the microwave door. They looked so incredibly safe in their bubble of entitlement, entirely convinced that they had won yet again. I swiped the screen to answer and lifted the phone to my ear. "Miss Riley," a deep voice said. "This is Agent Miller with the Enterprise Fraud Division. We detected a high-velocity wire transfer of $240,000 from your master account at 4 this morning. Due to the destination being an unverified escrow service, our system flagged it for immediate review. Did you authorize this transaction?" The kitchen was still buzzing with low conversation, but I locked eyes directly with Jason. His smile faltered slightly as he noticed I was still standing in the hallway, staring a hole right through him. I took a deep breath and spoke with absolute clarity, ensuring my voice carried across the room. "Yes, Agent. That $240,000 was not personal savings. It is a federal tax escrow holding for my corporate client pending an IRS audit. Yes, the wire was unauthorized. The effect was instantaneous and absolute." The clinking of coffee cups stopped. My father's hand froze halfway to Jason's shoulder. My mother spun around, her face instantly pale. The smug, self-satisfied smirk on Kendra's face vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. The room went dead silent. The only sound left in the massive Malibu estate was the gentle hum of the refrigerator. Agent Miller remained strictly professional on the line. "Understood, Miss Riley. Because this involves federal tax holdings, we are legally required to notify the IRS Criminal Investigation Division and immediately freeze the receiving account. We will also need to file a suspicious activity report regarding the origin of the authorization. Do you know who initiated the transfer?" I shifted my gaze to my mother. She looked like she was going to be sick. The color had completely drained from her cheeks, and her hands were trembling so violently that the porcelain cup rattled against its saucer. I let the silence stretch for 5 agonizing seconds, making sure she felt the full weight of a federal prison sentence hovering over her head. "Yes," I replied smoothly. "The unauthorized user accessed the funds via an outdated joint account portal linked to my childhood profile. The primary signer on that old profile is my mother, Brenda. You will find her digital signature and IP address on the transfer log." "Thank you for the confirmation," the agent said. "We are locking down all associated accounts to prevent further capital flight. A fraud packet will be sent to your secure email. We advise you to contact your corporate legal counsel immediately. I will be filing the police report within the hour," I assured him. "Thank you, Agent Miller." I lowered the phone and slid it back into my pocket. No one moved. Absolutely no one breathed. The air in the kitchen was suddenly thick with panic. Jason swallowed hard, his facade of wealth crumbling. He knew enough about business to understand the gravity of those words. Kendra, a woman who built her entire career on assessing legal provenance, instantly calculated the catastrophic damage this would do to her reputation. She took a slow, deliberate step away from her new husband. My father, who just 2 minutes ago was threatening to disinherit me, stared at the floor as if the marble tiles had suddenly turned into quicksand. They had expected me to scream. They had expected me to fight for my money, like a desperate child begging for scraps of respect. They had built their entire dynamic on the assumption that they could walk all over me and I would simply take it. But they miscalculated. I did not need to raise my voice. The United States government was about to do that for me. "Have a wonderful honeymoon, Jason," I said quietly. The door clicked shut behind me, sealing them inside their own self-made disaster. I stood on the front porch for a moment, the cool ocean breeze brushing against my face. Through the thick mahogany door, the heavy silence inside the house finally broke. I could hear Jason let out a loud, forced bark of laughter. It was the sound of a man desperately trying to convince himself that he was still in control. "Oh my God!" Jason scoffed, his voice carrying through the wood. "She actually hired someone to fake a phone call. Did you hear how robotic that guy sounded? What an absolute psychopath!" My mother immediately latched onto his denial, her voice rising in pitch as relief washed over her. "I knew it," Brenda gasped. "I knew she was just putting on a show. Federal tax escrow. Please, she is a glorified bookkeeper. She just wanted to scare us because she is jealous of you and Kendra. She has always been so dramatic. She cannot stand seeing anyone else happy. Let her throw her little tantrum." My father added, his tone dripping with disdain. "If she wants to play games, let her. She will come crawling back when she realizes she has alienated the only family she has." I shook my head, a genuine smile touching my lips for the first time that morning. Their arrogance was truly their greatest vulnerability. They had spent so many years underestimating me that they could not fathom a reality where I possessed real power. They chose to believe a comfortable lie rather than face the terrifying truth. I walked down the sweeping driveway toward the heavy iron gates where my ride was waiting. A sleek black SUV pulled up, the tires crunching softly on the gravel. The driver stepped out to open the door for me, glancing at my composed expression. "Heading to Los Angeles International Airport, miss?" he asked politely. "Yes, please," I replied, sliding into the leather back seat. "And I am in a bit of a rush." As the vehicle pulled away from the Malibu estate, leaving my family behind in their delusion, I unzipped my travel bag and pulled out my laptop. I connected to the secure mobile hotspot and opened my administrative financial dashboard. For years, I had quietly functioned as the financial safety net for my family. I co-signed loans to secure better interest rates for them. I kept emergency credit cards active under my name for their unexpected expenses. I subsidized their lifestyle under the guise of being a supportive daughter. That support ended today. I navigated to the first account on the list. It was a high-limit platinum credit card I had given my father 3 years ago for emergency medical expenses. I pulled up the transaction history and saw recent charges for golf clubs and premium cigars. With a single click, I suspended the account and reported the card as lost. Next was the auto loan for Jason's luxury sports car. I was the primary guarantor on that lease. Because he had missed the last 2 payments, the bank had already sent warning notices to my portal. I authorized the bank to initiate immediate repossession protocols due to breach of contract. Finally, I opened the profile for my mother's revolving credit line. She used it exclusively to maintain her status at the local country club, charging expensive lunches and spa treatments. I completely revoked her authorized user status, closing the line of credit permanently. I watched the screen as the status indicators turned from active green to a glaring locked red. In less than 10 minutes, I had systematically dismantled their entire financial infrastructure. I severed every single cord that attached my pristine credit score to their reckless spending. I did not just lock them out of my money, I locked them out of their own lives. They were currently sitting in a rented mansion wearing solid gold watches they bought with stolen federal funds, completely unaware that their credit cards were now useless pieces of plastic. They had no access to cash, they had no safety net, and they were about to face a luxury resort town with zero purchasing power. I closed the laptop and leaned back against the headrest, watching the palm trees blur past the tinted windows. The Pacific Coast Highway stretched out before me, bathed in bright morning sunlight. The trap was officially set. The financial freeze was only the beginning. By the time they realized the credit cards were declining, the federal agents would already be building their case. My family wanted to treat me like a bank, but they forgot that banks always collect their debts. And when the federal government is involved, the penalties for late payment are exceptionally severe. I took a deep breath, feeling so much lighter than I had in a decade. Exactly 4 hours later, I was sitting at my sleek glass desk in my downtown Los Angeles office. The panoramic view of the city usually commanded my attention, but today I was entirely focused on the glowing monitors displaying the frozen status of my family financial accounts. Right on schedule, my cell phone began to vibrate violently across the glass surface. The caller identification displayed Kendra's name. I let it ring 3 times before calmly pressing the green accept button and lifting the phone to my ear. Riley, Kendra hissed. Her voice was a tight, frantic whisper that echoed slightly, giving away her location in a spacious, high-ceilinged room. I am currently standing at the Emirates first-class check-in desk at the Los Angeles International Airport VIP Lounge. There is a massive line of my high-profile clients and colleagues in the terminal, and the ticketing agent is telling me that our flights to the Maldives have been canceled due to non-payment. I leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair, watching a red alert flash on my screen showing another declined transaction attempt from Jason's suspended auto lease account. "Oh," I replied evenly. "That sounds like a very stressful way to start a honeymoon, Kendra. Do not use that tone with me." She snapped, her voice trembling with a mixture of absolute rage and deep public embarrassment. Jason tried to give them his exclusive black card to rebook the tickets and the machine declined it. It declined it twice, Riley. The attendant actually asked him if he had a different form of payment in front of the entire first-class queue. I have never been so humiliated in my entire life. Jason is currently on the phone with his bank, yelling at some customer service representative about a system error. "But I know this is your doing. You locked the accounts just like you threatened to do this morning. I did warn you all that there would be severe consequences for stealing federal tax funds," I reminded her gently. "I simply removed myself from your financial ecosystem. What Jason is experiencing right now is not a system error. It is reality." Kendra let out a sharp, ragged breath. "I do not care about your petty family drama or whatever accounting lies you told your mother this morning. I care about my reputation. If my clients see me getting turned away from a flight because of a declined credit card, my career as a luxury art broker is completely over. I need you to wire $50,000 to my personal checking account right this second. Consider it a short-term loan to fix this ridiculous banking glitch you caused. I will make sure Jason pays you back the moment his startup funding clears next week. Just send the money, Riley." I smiled, though she could not see it. The sheer entitlement was almost impressive. "Kendra," I said slowly, ensuring every single word landed with maximum impact. "There is no banking glitch, and there is absolutely no startup funding clearing next week or next month or ever. Your husband is not a successful tech chief executive officer. He is a serial failure who has been living entirely off my credit score and my savings for the past 5 years. I did not cancel your first-class tickets to the Maldives. The credit card company canceled them because I refused to pay the past due balance on the card Jason used to book them." "You are lying," Kendra hissed, but the absolute certainty in her voice was beginning to crack. "Jason showed me the portfolio for the Calabasas house. He showed me the wire transfer for the down payment." "Yes," I replied smoothly. "He showed you a wire transfer of $240,000 that he and my mother stole from a federal tax holding account. The FBI and the IRS are currently building a massive wire fraud case against him as we speak." So no, Kendra, I will not be wiring you $50,000 to save your reputation at the airport lounge. If you want to fly first class to the Maldives, I suggest you ask your millionaire husband why his own cards are bouncing. Or better yet, maybe you should ask him to show you his actual tax returns. Before she could utter another word of denial or scream another demand, I ended the call. I placed the phone back down on my desk, feeling a profound sense of peace. The financial illusion they had built their entire lives upon was finally shattering in real time in the most public way possible, and there was absolutely nothing they could ever do to stop it. My peaceful moment lasted exactly 15 minutes before the phone on my desk lit up again. This time, the caller identification displayed my mother's number. I took a slow sip of my water, preparing myself for the inevitable explosion before answering. "Riley, you vindictive little brat!" my mother screamed the moment the line connected. Her voice was so shrill I had to pull the phone an inch away from my ear. "What on earth did you do to the credit cards?" Jason is standing at the Emirates counter, looking like an absolute fool, and my own country club account was just declined for a simple spa treatment. "You need to fix this right now." I kept my voice soft and measured. "I told you, Mom, I am no longer funding your lifestyles. You have $240,000 of my client's money. You should have plenty to cover a massage." "Listen to me, you ungrateful child." Brenda hissed, her tone turning vicious. "I am entirely sick of this fake federal agent nonsense. You are throwing a tantrum because Jason is getting married and building a real life while you sit alone in a sterile office. You want to play hardball. Fine. Let us play." She paused, taking a deep, dramatic breath. "I know exactly who the managing partners at your firm are, Riley. I have their office numbers saved. If you do not turn those credit cards back on and wire Jason the money to fix this flight situation, I am going to call your human resources department. I am going to tell them that you are having a severe psychotic break. I will say you are mentally unstable, actively trying to extort money from your own family, and that you are not fit to handle sensitive financial data. How long do you think you will keep that high-paying job of yours once your bosses think you are a liability?" It was the ultimate toxic parent maneuver. Whenever she could not control me with guilt, she resorted to threatening my livelihood. A few years ago, a threat like that would have sent me into a blind panic. I would have folded immediately, terrified of losing the career I had worked so hard to build. But today, her threat was the exact leverage I needed. To cement the federal case, I needed undeniable proof that Jason knowingly accepted the stolen funds. I needed him to put his signature on a legally binding document. I forced my breathing to sound shallow and erratic. I let a calculated silence stretch over the line, making her believe her threat had hit its mark. "Mom, please," I said, injecting just the right amount of panic into my voice. "Please do not call my firm. You know how strict they are about employee conduct. If you call them, they will suspend me pending an investigation. I could lose my license." I could hear the smug satisfaction radiating through the phone. "Then you know exactly what you need to do, Riley," she replied, her voice dripping with triumph. "Turn the cards back on and fix this." "I cannot just turn the cards on." I lied, my voice shaking slightly. "The bank locked everything down because of the wire transfer. But there is a way I can stop the fraud investigation. I can call the bank and reclassify the $240,000 as a one-time familial gift. If I tell them I authorized it retroactively, the investigation drops and your accounts will clear." "Then do it," Brenda commanded. "But there is a catch," I continued quickly. "Because it is such a massive amount of money, the IRS requires a gift receipt declaration for my personal tax records. Otherwise, I will be hit with a massive audit penalty next year. If I am going to forgive this money and let Jason keep it for the house, he has to sign a legal document acknowledging it was a gift from me." My mother let out a heavy sigh of annoyance, but I could tell she had taken the bait hook, line, and sinker. "Fine," she snapped. "If a stupid piece of paper is what it takes to get you to stop this psychotic behavior, he will sign it." Since they could not fly out today, they were stuck in Los Angeles. I told her I would have my corporate lawyer draft the document immediately. We agreed to meet at a quiet cafe near their rented Malibu estate the following morning. Make sure you bring the paperwork bright and early. Riley, my mother sneered before hanging up. And try to look presentable for once. I placed the phone down and smiled. She thought she had won. She thought she had bullied me into submission. She had no idea she just successfully brokered her own son's federal conviction. The next morning, the Pacific fog was still clinging to the coastline when I pulled into the parking lot of an upscale organic cafe a few miles from their rented Malibu estate. I walked inside and secured a secluded booth in the back corner, setting my leather briefcase on the table. Inside that briefcase was a single sheet of paper that my corporate attorney had stayed up until midnight drafting. It was disguised as a standard tax exemption form, but the legal jargon buried in the second paragraph constituted a full, undeniable declaration of receipt of funds. This document was the final nail in his coffin. In federal court, proving intent is always the hardest part of a financial crime case. By signing this paper, Jason was legally admitting that he knew exactly how much money was taken and that he was the sole beneficiary of the illicit transfer. 10 minutes later, the front bell chimed, and my mother walked in, followed closely by Jason. They looked exhausted from a night of declined credit cards and airport humiliation, but they still managed to project an aura of absolute superiority. Jason was wearing designer sunglasses indoors, which he slowly pulled down the bridge of his nose as he spotted me. He strutted over to the booth and slid into the seat across from me, stretching his legs out. My mother sat next to him, crossing her arms and giving me a look of pure triumph. "Go grab me a double espresso," Riley, Jason ordered, snapping his fingers in my direction as if I were a waiter. "And get Mom a matcha latte. We barely slept last night dealing with that ridiculous bank freeze you pulled." I did not move. I just looked at him, keeping my expression perfectly neutral. "I am not here to fetch you coffee, Jason," I said quietly. "I am here to get the paperwork signed so I can call the bank and lift the fraud alert." Jason rolled his eyes and let out a dramatic sigh. "You are always so uptight," he complained, leaning forward and resting his elbows on the table. "You know you really ruined the vibe of my wedding weekend. Kendra is still furious about the airport. You are lucky we are even giving you the chance to fix this. Most families would just cut you off completely after a stunt like that." The sheer delusion it took for him to threaten me with abandonment while actively holding $240,000 of stolen money was staggering. But I needed him confident. I needed him to feel untouchable. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the crisp white document along with a heavy black fountain pen. I slid them both across the smooth wooden table. "Here it is," I said, keeping my voice submissive and defeated. "The gift declaration. It states that I am retroactively authorizing the transfer and that you are taking full possession of the funds for the purchase of the Calabasas property. Once you sign this, I can upload it to my tax portal and the bank will drop the investigation. Your cards will be active within the hour." My mother leaned over, trying to look at the document, but the dense legal formatting bored her immediately. "Just sign it, Jason," she urged impatiently. "Let us get this over with so we can go back to the airport and salvage the honeymoon." Jason picked up the pen, twirling it between his fingers. He did not read the paragraphs detailing his willful acceptance of unverified escrow capital. He did not read the clause waiving his right to claim ignorance of the fund's origin. He just looked at me with a sickeningly smug grin. "You see, Riley," he sneered, clicking the pen open. "This is why I am the chief executive officer and you are just the number cruncher. You tried to play a power game, but you folded the second things got real. I always win. You just do not have the stomach for the big leagues." He pressed the pen to the paper and scrawled his signature on the bottom line. He pushed the document aggressively back across the table. "Now get on the phone and turn my life back on," he demanded. I carefully picked up the paper, checking to make sure the ink was dark and the signature was clear. It was perfect. I slipped it back into a protective folder and placed it inside my briefcase, locking the brass clasps with a sharp click. I stood up from the booth, looking down at my brother and my mother. "I will upload this immediately," I promised, my voice finally losing its submissive edge and turning ice cold. "Have a safe flight, Jason." I walked out of the cafe, leaving them sitting there waiting for bank accounts that would never unlock. The drive back to my downtown office took 30 minutes, but every second felt like an orchestrated countdown. I bypassed the front receptionist and walked straight into my corner office, locking the heavy glass door. I placed my briefcase on the desk, popped the clasps, and pulled out the signed declaration. I smoothed the crisp white paper flat and placed it face down into my high-resolution digital scanner. The machine whirred to life, capturing his signature in perfect forensic detail. Physical evidence was secured. Now I needed the digital kill shot. I sat down in my ergonomic chair and woke up my multi-monitor workstation. As a forensic accountant, my job was to find the ghosts in the machine. People always think money just disappears, but money leaves a footprint. You just have to know which digital shadows to chase. I logged into my encrypted portal, bypassing biometric authentication, to access the bank's raw server logs. I was not looking at clean banking interfaces anymore. I was looking at lines of raw transaction data, timestamps, and routing protocols. First, I needed to isolate the exact moment my mother breached the account. I ran a query for the $240,000 wire transfer. The system immediately spit back a string of alphanumeric codes. I highlighted the authorization sequence. My mother had used her old legacy credentials to access the joint profile, but to authorize a transfer of that magnitude, she had to bypass a secondary security prompt. She had digitally forged my electronic signature. I pulled the IP address attached to that specific login attempt. It took me 30 seconds to run a geolocation trace on the data. The ping bounced off a cell tower directly above the Malibu coastline. I cross-referenced the device registry. It was an exact match for my mother's personal tablet. She had stolen $250,000 while sitting on a patio overlooking the ocean. I exported the geolocation map, the device identification number, and the forged authorization logs into a secure master file. The charge for identity theft was now mathematically undeniable. Next, I had to track the money itself. Federal funds do not just move, they echo. I pulled the interstate routing numbers from the wire transfer. The money had bounced from my corporate escrow account in California to a regional clearinghouse in Nevada, before finally settling into an unverified third-party holding account. I ran a background check on the holding account and smiled grimly. It was a shell company set up by the Calabasas real estate broker. By moving federal tax funds across state lines to purchase real estate, they elevated simple theft into federal money laundering. I watched the data flow across my screens, building a web of undeniable guilt. Jason thought his signature was just a formality to trick his little sister. In reality, that piece of paper was the keystone that connected his knowledge of the stolen funds directly to the interstate money laundering scheme. He could not claim he was a passive beneficiary anymore. He had legally claimed ownership of the transaction. I opened a new encrypted file directory and began dragging and dropping the evidence. File 1 contained the raw bank server logs and the geolocation data proving my mother's identity theft. File 2 held the interstate routing numbers and the shell company details proving the money laundering protocol. File 3 was the high-resolution scan of the gift declaration featuring Jason's signature proving willful receipt of stolen federal funds. I compressed the entire directory into a single heavily encrypted digital packet. I picked up my office phone and dialed my corporate attorney's direct line. He answered on the first ring. "I have the package," I said, my voice steady and completely devoid of hesitation. "Are you absolutely sure about this?" Riley, he asked carefully. "Once I send this to the federal agencies, there is no pulling it back. Your family will face severe mandatory minimum sentences. The machine will not stop until it crushes them." "They made their choice the moment they touched that account," I replied. "Send it to the IRS Criminal Investigation Division and the FBI field office immediately. Include a formal request for an asset forfeiture warrant on the Calabasas property." "Understood," he said. "Transmitting now." I hung up the phone and leaned back in my chair, staring out at the Los Angeles skyline. The digital packet was gone, flying securely through fiber optic cables directly to the federal government. My family was currently sitting in a cafe waiting for a bank account to unlock. They had absolutely no idea that a massive federal legal machine had just locked its crosshairs directly onto their lives. The trap was sprung. There was no escaping the fallout now. While I sat in my secure office watching the federal confirmation receipts roll into my encrypted inbox, a very different scene was unfolding back at the rented Malibu estate. I would later learn the exact details of this chaotic afternoon during the divorce depositions, but the sequence of events was as predictable as it was pathetic. My mother and brother returned to the mansion just before noon, practically vibrating with unearned arrogance. They marched into the grand living room where Kendra was pacing furiously across the expensive Persian rug. She was still wearing the clothes she had worn to the airport, her designer luggage sitting uselessly by the massive front door. Jason immediately poured himself a drink from the bar cart and confidently announced that he had handled the entire situation. He told Kendra that my little temper tantrum was officially over, that I had signed the necessary banking release forms, and that his accounts would be fully active by the evening. When Kendra demanded to know why the cards were not working right that second, Jason smoothly lied without missing a beat. He used a bunch of hollow financial buzzwords claiming that international fraud holds require a mandatory 24 to 48-hour clearing period. He suggested they just enjoy the Malibu house for the weekend instead of flying out. My mother backed him up, of course, patting Kendra on the shoulder and telling her to go relax by the pool. She told Kendra that I was just being difficult because I was jealous of their beautiful wedding. But Kendra was not a gullible woman. She survived in the cutthroat world of luxury art brokering because she knew exactly how to spot a forgery. She dealt with eccentric millionaires, massive wire transfers, and international banking protocols daily. She knew exactly how banking holds worked. And she knew that a man worth $10 million does not get his exclusive black credit card declined at an airport terminal unless he is fundamentally insolvent. Kendra smiled tightly, agreed to go unpack her bags, and walked upstairs to the master suite. But she did not unpack her clothes. The moment she heard Jason walk out to the stone patio and splash into the infinity pool, her survival instincts kicked into high gear. She walked directly to his expensive leather weekender bag, sitting at the foot of the massive king-sized bed. Jason was notoriously sloppy with his paperwork. He loved the aesthetic of looking busy, so he always carried a thick leather portfolio stuffed with contracts. Kendra unzipped the bag and pulled out the heavy portfolio, her hands shaking slightly with adrenaline. She ignored the glossy pitch decks for his supposed tech startup and bypassed the printed mood boards for the Calabasas house renovations. She was looking for hard numbers. She flipped to the very back of the portfolio and found exactly what she needed. It was the official settlement statement from the escrow company handling the Calabasas property purchase. As a high-end broker, Kendra read complex closing documents the way normal people read a menu. Her manicured finger traced down the itemized list of buyer credits until she reached the line detailing the earnest money deposit and the primary down payment. The amount listed was exactly $240,000. But the origin account attached to the wire transfer routing number did not say Jason Corporate, LLC. It did not say Apex Tech Solutions or any other fictional company name Jason had bragged about during their 6-month courtship. The originating account name printed clearly in black ink was Riley Corporate Tax Escrow. Kendra stared at the document, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. The pieces of the puzzle aggressively snapped together in her mind, forming a terrifying and undeniable picture. She remembered my exact words from the airport lounge. I had told her Jason was a serial failure, living entirely off my credit score. I had told her the flights were canceled because I refused to pay his past due balances. And most damning of all, I had told her the down payment for their dream home was stolen directly from a federal tax holding account. She looked at the heavy gold watch on her wrist and suddenly felt sick to her stomach. She looked around the lavish rented bedroom, realizing none of it belonged to them. Everything was a complete fabrication. Jason was not a tech genius experiencing a temporary cash flow issue. He was a broke, desperate fraud who had hijacked his sister's professional bank account to buy his way into her elite social circle. And his mother had helped him do it. Absolute panic washed over her as she realized the catastrophic legal implications. If my warning about the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Internal Revenue Service was real, she was now legally married to a man who had just committed a massive federal crime. Kendra carefully slid the settlement statement back into the leather portfolio and zipped the bag shut exactly as she had found it. She walked into the adjoining bathroom, locked the heavy wooden door, and stared at her pale reflection in the mirror. She did not cry. She did not scream. Instead, she pulled out her phone and began searching for the best white-collar criminal defense attorneys in Los Angeles. Exactly 1 month passed since that fateful afternoon in the Malibu bathroom. You might wonder why Kendra did not simply pack her bags and flee the moment she discovered her husband was a federal criminal. But you have to understand the psychology of a woman whose entire career relies on public perception. If she filed for a sudden annulment days after a lavish wedding, her elite clients would smell blood in the water. She needed a bulletproof legal strategy to sever herself from Jason's incoming indictment. Her defense attorney advised her to maintain the illusion of a happy marriage until the federal agencies made their official move. So she swallowed her panic and played her part perfectly. Which brought us to a crisp Saturday evening in Calabasas. Jason and Kendra were hosting a massive housewarming party at the $1.5 million property my mother and brother had illegally purchased with federal tax dollars. The sheer audacity of the event was staggering. As I pulled my car onto the quiet suburban street, the glow of string lights illuminated the massive modern estate. A private valet service actively parked imported luxury vehicles along the curb. I could hear the elegant notes of a live string quartet drifting through the open windows, mingling with the continuous clinking of crystal champagne flutes. Inside the house, the atmosphere was suffocatingly opulent. The sprawling living room was packed with Kendra's high-net-worth art clients, eccentric gallery owners, and wealthy private collectors. Waiters in crisp black uniforms circulated with silver trays of imported caviar and delicate truffle tarts. Kendra was floating through the crowd, wearing a stunning emerald green evening gown. She smiled warmly, laughed at dull jokes, and kissed cheeks, making seamless introductions. To the untrained eye, she looked like the epitome of success. But I knew the truth. Beneath the flawless makeup, she was a woman standing on the edge of a cliff. Every time a car door slammed outside, her eyes darted toward the entrance, terrified that the authorities had finally arrived. Jason, on the other hand, was completely ignorant of his impending doom. He was standing near the custom marble fireplace, holding a glass of 20-year-old scotch, holding court with a group of older wealthy investors Kendra had introduced him to. He was playing the role of the visionary tech chief executive officer to absolute perfection. I watched from the shadows of the hallway as he boldly gestured with his free hand, loudly bragging about a massive funding round that did not actually exist. He spoke about market disruption with the effortless confidence of a man who believed his own lies. He was so deeply entrenched in his fantasy that he actually believed he belonged in this room among real millionaires. He was completely blind to the nervous tension radiating from his new wife. My parents were equally intoxicated by the stolen luxury. My mother, Brenda, was wearing a brand new designer dress, holding a glass of expensive reserve wine, laughing loudly with Kendra's sophisticated friends. She was eagerly pointing out the custom architectural details of the house, taking full credit for raising such an ambitious son. She told anyone who would listen how proud she was of Jason's tech empire, erasing the fact that she had personally forged a digital signature to steal the money funding this entire charade. My father Thomas was standing by the outdoor fire pit, smoking a premium Cuban cigar, acting like the patriarch of a modern dynasty. He looked incredibly proud, entirely convinced that his massive gamble on the golden child had finally paid off. They had built a beautiful shimmering castle out of stolen federal funds, and tonight was their grand coronation. The entire family was drunk on the illusion of high society. They had completely forgotten the serious warning I gave them exactly a month ago. They assumed that because my bank accounts had miraculously unfrozen, and because the police had not immediately knocked on their door, that my threats were empty. They thought they had outsmarted the system. They thought they were untouchable and beyond the reach of the law. I stood alone in the grand entryway, adjusting the cuffs of my sharp-tailored charcoal suit. I had not been invited to this celebration of theft. My mother had explicitly told me I was banned from the property, so I would not ruin their aesthetic with my boring corporate energy. But I was not here to drink their champagne or eat their caviar. I was here to witness the finale. I took a deep breath, letting the cool evening air fill my lungs before stepping out of the shadows and walking directly into the center of their glittering fake world. The heavy custom oak doors were propped wide open to let the cool evening breeze circulate through the massive estate. I walked over the threshold and stepped directly into the grand foyer. For my entire adult life, my family had mocked my wardrobe. They called my practical business attire cheap and depressing. They assumed I dressed modestly because I was a failure who could not afford luxury. But tonight, I was not wearing off-the-rack department store clothes. I was wearing a bespoke charcoal gray designer suit tailored perfectly to my exact measurements. Underneath the structured jacket, I wore a crisp white silk blouse. My hair was styled in a sleek professional blowout, and my posture was entirely unyielding. I looked exactly like what I was, which was a highly successful corporate investigator, preparing to dismantle a financial criminal. The foyer was illuminated by a massive crystal chandelier that cast fractured light across the polished marble floors. As I stood there taking in the sheer scale of the stolen property, I saw my father break away from a group of men near the indoor bar. Thomas had spotted me. His face instantly contorted from the jovial, proud patriarch into a mask of pure, venomous panic. He hastily excused himself from the conversation and marched toward the entryway, his heavy footsteps echoing slightly over the string quartet playing in the next room. Before I could step further into the house, he intercepted me. He moved with an aggressive, frantic energy, physically planting his large frame directly in my path and blocking my access to the main living room. He reached out and clamped his thick hand around my upper arm, his fingers digging painfully into the expensive fabric of my suit sleeve. "What in the hell do you think you are doing here, Riley?" He hissed, his voice a harsh, frantic whisper. His eyes darted nervously over my shoulder to make sure none of the wealthy guests were watching us. "I told your mother to make sure you stayed far away from this house. You are not invited. You are nothing but trash trying to ruin a high-class event." I looked down at his hand gripping my arm, and then looked directly into his angry eyes. I did not shrink back. I did not apologize. I simply stood my ground, letting the absolute silence of my reaction unnerve him. "Get out of here before I have security throw you off the property," he threatened, pulling me slightly toward the open front door. "Jason is finally establishing himself with real money and real power. I will not let a bitter, jealous spinster drag him down tonight." He expected me to argue in hushed tones. He expected me to cry and retreat into the night, just like the obedient scapegoat I had always been. But I knew the rules of high society better than he ever would. Wealthy people despise public conflict. They abhor a scene. And my father was currently pretending to be a wealthy man. I smoothly twisted my arm, breaking his grip with a sharp, practiced motion. Instead of whispering back, I took a decisive step around his bulky frame, moving directly into the sightline of the main living room. Then I projected my voice. I did not yell, but I spoke with the clear, resonant authority of a woman addressing a crowded boardroom. "Thomas, I absolutely cannot believe the magnificent scale of this architecture," I said loudly, a bright and completely fake smile spreading across my face. The sudden, clear sound of my voice cut right through the ambient chatter of the party. Dozens of heads turned in our direction. Wealthy art collectors, gallery owners, and elite investors all paused their conversations to look toward the grand foyer. I kept my voice elevated, gesturing elegantly toward the ceiling. "The vaulted ceilings in this entryway are simply breathtaking." I continued, ensuring every single guest could hear my enthusiastic praise. And this imported marble flooring is exquisite. Jason and Kendra have truly outdone themselves with this property. Do you not agree, Dad? My father froze, entirely trapped. The venom instantly drained from his face, replaced by a sickeningly pale shade of panic. He was suddenly the center of attention, surrounded by Kendra's high net worth clients. If he yelled at me now or tried to physically throw me out, he would instantly expose himself as an aggressive, unstable lunatic. He would shatter the illusion of the perfect wealthy family he was so desperately trying to project. He had absolutely no choice but to play along. He swallowed hard, his jaw clenching so tightly I thought his teeth might crack. "Yes," he muttered, forcing a strained, unnatural smile for the audience watching us. "Yes, it is a beautiful house, Riley." I smiled brightly at him, acknowledging his absolute defeat. "Thank you so much for the warm welcome," I said, my tone dripping with polite sarcasm. "I think I will go congratulate the happy couple now." I left him standing there paralyzed by his own social anxiety and walked smoothly into the heart of the party. The guests quickly returned to their drinks and their conversations, completely unaware of the brutal psychological warfare that had just taken place. I accepted a crystal flute of champagne from a passing waiter and scanned the crowded room. I had successfully breached their fortress. Now it was time to find Kendra and plant the final seed of destruction before the authorities arrived to finish the job. I spotted her standing near an elaborate tower of champagne flutes in the main dining area. Kendra was laughing at a joke told by a man I recognized from Forbes magazine as a large private art collector. She looked radiant, but I could see subtle signs of immense physical stress. Her knuckles were white where she gripped her glass, and her eyes darted toward the front entrance. I glided through the crowd of millionaires, my charcoal suit blending into the sea of high-end attire. I stopped just behind her, waiting patiently for the collector to excuse himself to take a call. The moment he stepped away, Kendra turned around to grab another glass from the tower. She froze the instant she saw me standing there. The forced smile vanished from her lips completely. "What are you doing here, Riley?" she whispered, her voice tight and desperate. She took a quick step closer to me, trying to use her body to shield our conversation from the surrounding guests. "If you make a scene tonight, I swear I will have you arrested for trespassing. This is my house." I took a slow sip of my champagne, letting the crisp bubbles burst against my tongue. "I am not here to make a scene, Kendra," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper, but carrying absolute authority. "And we both know this is not your house. We both know exactly whose money paid for the marble floor we are standing on." Kendra swallowed hard, her throat visibly working. She glanced around, frantically terrified that someone might overhear us. "I do not know what you are talking about," she lied, her voice trembling. "Jason transferred those funds from his corporate account. He showed me the settlement statement." "He showed you a settlement statement with my name on it," I corrected smoothly. "A settlement statement tied directly to a stolen federal tax escrow account." I saw the panic in your eyes at the airport, Kendra. You are an incredibly smart woman. You survive in the cutthroat luxury art market because you know how to authenticate value. You spot forgeries for a living? I leaned in slightly, closing the physical distance between us until I could smell her expensive floral perfume. I kept my expression perfectly pleasant, as if we were discussing the weather. "Kendra, you appraise multi-million-dollar art for a living," I whispered calmly, my words slicing through her remaining defenses like a scalpel. "How did you fail to appraise your own husband? Did you even ask to see his corporate tax returns before you signed the marriage license?" Her blood visibly ran cold. All the color drained from her perfectly contoured face, leaving her looking pale and suddenly very fragile. Her breathing became shallow and rapid. She knew. She had looked in the leather portfolio a month ago, and she knew everything I was saying was the absolute truth. But hearing it spoken aloud, hearing the undeniable confirmation of her worst nightmare, paralyzed her completely. "He told me it was a misunderstanding," she choked out, her voice barely audible over the string quartet. "He told me he was resolving the banking issue with you." "Jason lies the way other people breathe," I said plainly. He has no tech startup. He has no Series A funding. He has a pile of defaulted loans and a mountain of credit card debt that I stopped paying for exactly 1 month ago. You married a man whose entire existence is a carefully constructed forgery. And because you legally tied yourself to him, you are now standing in the blast radius of a federal crime. I took another sip of champagne, watching her process the catastrophic reality of her situation. In federal investigations, they use a protocol called marital asset forfeiture, I explained casually, as if I were giving her friendly financial advice. It means that when the Department of Justice seizes this house, they will also seize every single asset tied to the household. Your personal bank accounts, your art commissions, your business licenses, everything goes down with the ship. Kendra stared at me, her eyes wide with sheer unadulterated terror. She looked like she was going to faint right into the champagne tower. I reached out and gently patted her arm, a gesture of fake sympathy for the audience watching us. If I were you, Kendra, I would stop pouring champagne and start looking for his real financial documents, I suggested softly. You might want to know exactly how much prison time you are currently accessory to. I stepped back, giving her a polite smile, and turned away, melting back into the crowd of oblivious wealthy guests. I left her standing there, vibrating with absolute panic, the seed of destruction firmly planted in her mind. Kendra did not stay by the champagne tower for another second. The elegant facade she had maintained all evening completely shattered the moment I disappeared into the crowded room. She set her crystal flute down on a passing waiter's silver tray with a sharp clink and practically ran toward the grand staircase. She pushed past a group of elite gallery owners, offering a tight, breathless excuse about needing to check on the catering staff. Her heart hammered violently against her ribs. She reached the second-floor landing and hurried down the long carpeted hallway toward the master wing. At the very end of the corridor was Jason's private home office. He had insisted on outfitting the room with solid mahogany doors and a heavy deadbolt, claiming his tech startup required maximum corporate security. He always kept it locked. But Kendra had watched him slip the spare brass key inside a decorative porcelain vase on the hallway console table a week ago. Kendra reached into the vase, her fingers blindly scraping the bottom until she felt the cold metal. She pulled the key out, shoved it into the deadbolt, and turned it with a sharp click. She slipped inside the dark room, locking the door instantly behind her. She did not turn on the overhead chandelier, terrified someone outside might see the light shining under the frame. Instead, she clicked on the small brass banker's lamp sitting on the oak desk. The desk was staged to look like the workspace of a visionary. But Kendra bypassed the computer, knowing Jason would have password-protected his digital files. She went straight for the heavy wooden filing cabinet tucked underneath. She pulled the top drawer open. It was stuffed with disorganized folders. She grabbed the first thick stack of papers and dropped it onto the desk. Her manicured hands quickly flipped through the documents. They were not stock certificates or venture capital term sheets. They were final notice collection letters. There was a notice of default on his luxury sports car lease. There was a threatening letter from a high-interest private lender demanding immediate payment for a $50,000 personal loan. There were stacks of credit card statements showing accounts completely maxed out and months past due. Every single piece of paper was a testament to his absolute financial ruin. There was zero evidence of a tech empire. Kendra felt a cold sweat break out on the back of her neck. She shoved the collection letters aside and dug deeper into the bottom drawer. Tucked beneath a stack of blank printer paper, she found a heavy ivory envelope with an official government seal printed in the corner. The return address belonged to the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. Her hands shook violently as she pulled the letter from the envelope. It was not addressed to Jason. It was a formal notice of federal inquiry addressed directly to my corporate firm, referencing the exact escrow holding account I had mentioned downstairs. The document detailed a massive unauthorized wire transfer of $240,000. It explicitly warned that any assets purchased with the stolen funds would be subject to immediate federal seizure. Kendra dropped the letter onto the leather desk pad. The printed words blurred together as tears of absolute panic welled up in her eyes. I had not been lying to scare her. Every terrifying thing I whispered to her was documented truth. The beautiful $1.5 million house she was hosting a party in was essentially a federal crime scene. The luxury cars, the designer, clothes, the catered caviar were all bought with stolen government money. She gripped the edge of the heavy oak desk, trying to steady her trembling legs. She was a respected art broker. She had spent a decade building an impeccable reputation. Now she was legally tethered to a sinking ship. She had signed a marriage certificate binding her assets and her future to a man heading directly to federal prison. When the authorities raided this house, they would not care that she was ignorant of the crime. They would freeze her bank accounts, confiscate her business licenses, and drag her name through the mud on national television. Kendra looked at the glowing green numbers on the digital desk clock. Her house was full of millionaires drinking champagne, and her entire life was completely over. She had to find a way to sever herself from Jason before the flashing red and blue lights appeared in the driveway. She shoved the documents back, locked the cabinet, and turned off the brass lamp. Survival was the only thing that mattered to her now. Kendra stepped out of the dark office and closed the heavy mahogany door quietly behind her. Her hands were still shaking, but the paralyzing fear had completely transformed into a blinding white-hot rage. She walked briskly down the carpeted hallway toward the grand staircase. Halfway down the corridor, she collided right into Jason. He was walking upstairs with an empty crystal glass in his hand, smelling of expensive scotch and cheap cologne. "Hey, babe," he said casually, flashing that perfect practiced smile. "People are asking for you downstairs. The caterers want to know if they should bring out the dessert trays." Kendra grabbed him by the lapels of his custom blazer and shoved him hard against the hallway wall. The heavy thud of his back hitting the drywall was masked by the loud music drifting up from the living room. Jason's smile instantly vanished, replaced by a look of genuine shock. "What is wrong with you?" he hissed, trying to pry her manicured hands off his jacket. "You are going to wrinkle the suit." "I saw the file," Kendra whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of absolute disgust and raw fury. "I unlocked the bottom drawer of your desk, Jason. I saw the default notices. I saw the maxed-out credit card statements. And I saw the letter from the Internal Revenue Service addressed to your sister." All the color drained from Jason's face. For the first time since I had known him, the arrogant golden child looked completely terrified. He opened his mouth to speak, to spin another intricate web of lies, but Kendra cut him off before he could utter a single syllable. "Do not you dare lie to me," she warned, her nails digging painfully into his chest. "Riley told me everything downstairs. She told me you stole federal tax money to buy this house." I did not want to believe her. I wanted to believe the man I married was just going through a rough patch. "But you are not a chief executive officer, Jason. You are a broke, pathetic criminal, and you used my name to launder stolen government funds." Jason swallowed hard, his eyes darting frantically toward the staircase to ensure no one was listening. "Kendra, listen to me," he pleaded, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. "It is just a temporary cash flow problem. I have investors lined up. I am going to pay the account back before the federal agents even realize it is missing. I just needed this house to secure the optics for my next pitch." "Optics," Kendra repeated, letting out a sharp, humorless laugh. "You risked my entire career and my freedom for optics." Before Jason could respond, the floorboards creaked. My mother, Brenda, appeared at the top of the stairs holding a fresh glass of wine. She had followed Jason up, looking for a quiet moment away from the crowd. She took one look at Kendra pinning Jason against the wall, and her face hardened into a mask of maternal indignation. "What on earth is going on here?" Brenda demanded, marching over to them. "Let go of your husband, Kendra. Have you lost your mind? Your son is a federal criminal," Kendra snapped, finally releasing Jason's lapels and taking a step back. "He has no money, Brenda. He financed this entire fake life with stolen funds, and you helped him do it. I saw the escrow documents. Instead of looking ashamed or panicked, my mother simply rolled her eyes and took a sip of her wine. She looked at Kendra with utter disdain. "Oh, please," Brenda scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. "Stop being so dramatic. Jason is a visionary. Visionaries sometimes have to bend the rules to get their businesses off the ground. That money was just sitting in Riley's account doing absolutely nothing. We put it to good use." Kendra stared at her mother-in-law, completely horrified by the casual confession. "You stole $250,000 from the federal government," she whispered. "And a good wife supports her husband financially?" Brenda shot back, her tone turning venomous. "We brought you into this family. We gave you access to a beautiful home and a lavish lifestyle. You should be thanking Jason instead of attacking him in the hallway like a hysterical woman. You have plenty of rich clients, Kendra. If the bank asks for the money back, you can just sell a few more paintings and cover the difference." The final piece of the puzzle clicked perfectly into place. Kendra looked back and forth between Jason and Brenda, realizing the sickening truth. The entire family was in on the con. They had targeted her. They knew she was a successful luxury art broker with high society connections and a pristine credit score. They did not want her to be a part of their family. They wanted her to be their next financial safety net once Riley's accounts ran dry. She was the ultimate mark. "I am leaving," Kendra said, her voice turning completely hollow. "I am going to walk down those stairs, call my lawyer, and file for an immediate annulment. Then I am going directly to the police. I am not going down with you." She turned on her heel and took a step toward the staircase, but Jason moved faster. Panic completely overtook his features. If Kendra walked out of that house tonight in front of all those wealthy investors, his facade would permanently shatter. He lunged forward and grabbed Kendra's upper arm, his grip bruising and desperate. "You are not going anywhere," he hissed, pulling her forcefully back from the stairs. He leaned in close, his breath hot against her ear. "Half of the people down there are your clients, Kendra. If you run out of here crying and the feds show up, you look just as guilty as I do. You signed the marriage license. We are in this together." Kendra tried to yank her arm away, but Jason was much stronger. He locked his hand around her wrist and plastered a terrifyingly fake smile onto his face. Now Jason said through gritted teeth, "We are going to walk down those stairs hand in hand. You are going to smile at your rich friends. You are going to play the perfect happy wife. Because if I go to prison, Kendra, I promise I will drag your pristine reputation right down to the bottom with me." Kendra looked into his eyes and saw nothing but the cold, desperate calculation of a trapped animal. She stopped fighting. She allowed him to pull her forward, adjusting her emerald gown with a trembling free hand. Together they descended the grand staircase, returning to a party that was entirely built on lies, unaware that the real authorities were already on their way. Jason and Kendra reappeared at the base of the grand staircase. Jason had his fingers wrapped so tightly around Kendra's waist that I could see his knuckles turning white under the harsh light of the crystal chandelier. He flagged down a passing waiter and aggressively grabbed a fresh glass of expensive champagne. A heavy sheen of nervous sweat glistened on his forehead, and his tailored suit jacket looked slightly damp under the arms. He was a trapped man desperately trying to act like a king. He picked up a silver spoon and clinked it sharply against the side of his crystal glass. The high-pitched ringing echoed rapidly through the massive living room. The string quartet immediately stopped playing their instruments. The room full of millionaires fell completely silent, turning their attention to the grand staircase. "If I could have everyone's attention for a brief moment," Jason announced, his voice booming with forced artificial confidence. "I want to personally welcome all of you to our beautiful new home. It has been an absolutely incredible month. My tech firm is currently closing our best financial quarter yet, and I get to share this magnificent estate with my stunning new wife, Kendra." He paused, his eyes scanning the crowd of wealthy investors and elite gallery owners until they locked directly onto me. I was standing quietly near the back of the room, near the patio doors. A wicked and desperate idea clearly formed in his head. He needed to assert total dominance. He needed to publicly explain the money, just in case Kendra decided to talk to her high society friends later. You know, Jason continued, taking a bold step forward and pointing his glass directly at me. Building a massive empire takes a village. And tonight I actually want to raise a glass to someone very special who is standing right over there. My older sister, Riley. The entire crowd turned to look at me in my sharp-tailored charcoal suit. Jason smiled widely, but his eyes were cold and frantic with unspoken panic. Riley is a number cruncher, Jason told the crowd, his tone dripping with heavy patronizing pity. She works incredibly long hours in a small cubicle downtown. She does not get out much. In fact, she has always been a bit of a loner who struggles to socialize. But when I told her I was buying this magnificent house in Calabasas for my new bride, Riley insisted on helping me out. He took a dramatic sip of his champagne, letting his insulting words sink in. She practically emptied her entire little savings account to make a generous financial contribution to our down payment. I told her no, of course, but she absolutely insisted. I think when you live a quiet, solitary life, you just want to feel like you are a part of something bigger. You want to live vicariously through someone else's grand success. So thank you, Riley, my lonely, hardworking sister, for buying a small piece of our dream tonight. The crowd offered a round of polite but highly uncomfortable applause. A few of the wealthy private art collectors gave me looks of profound pity. They genuinely believed his narrative. They thought I was a sad, aging spinster who had handed over my life savings just to buy a tiny scrap of affection from my wealthy, successful younger brother. My mother, Brenda, beamed with absolute radiant pride. She raised her reserve wine glass high, completely validating Jason's humiliating public narrative. My father, Thomas, let out a loud, booming chuckle, slapping the shoulder of an investor standing next to him. They were entirely thrilled by my public degradation. This was their ultimate toxic fantasy playing out in real time, putting me in my place while elevating the golden child on a brilliant pedestal. But Kendra was not smiling at all. She stood entirely frozen next to Jason, her face completely ashen and devoid of life. She looked at the crowd of her elite clients enthusiastically applauding a federal crime. Then she looked directly at me. Her eyes were screaming in silent terror. She knew every single word Jason just spoke was a catastrophic lie. I did not blush. I did not look away or hang my head in shame. I stood perfectly still, holding my own glass of champagne. Jason thought he was humiliating me. He thought this grand speech would force me out the door in tears of defeat. He had absolutely no idea that his arrogant little toast was the greatest gift he could have ever given a forensic accountant. In his desperate attempt to control the narrative and stroke his own fragile ego, Jason had just provided dozens of high-net-worth witnesses with a verbal confession. He had publicly acknowledged receipt of the exact funds the federal government was currently tracking. I raised my glass slightly in his direction, acknowledging his toast with a serene, unbothered smile. Let him enjoy the applause. Let him savor the taste of the expensive champagne. It was the very last moment of triumph he would ever experience. The scattered applause faded into the ambient hum of the luxury estate. Jason stood at the base of the staircase, his chest puffed out entirely, convinced his public humiliation had effectively silenced me. Several guests near the patio doors shot me sympathetic glances, completely buying into his fabricated narrative of the pathetic, desperate spinster sister. I did not shrink away from their pity. Instead, I stepped away from the glass doors and walked directly into the center of the expansive living room. The crowd naturally parted for me, perhaps expecting me to make a tearful exit or offer a meek apology. I did neither. I stopped precisely in the middle of the Persian rug, holding my crystal flute of champagne, perfectly level. I am not one for public speaking. I began, my voice clear and resonant, slicing through the quiet murmurs of the room. But since my brother has decided to make financial disclosures a part of the festivities, I feel it is only appropriate to ensure his accounting is completely accurate. Jason's smug smile faltered slightly. He shifted his weight, his grip tightening on Kendra's waist. My father took a sudden step forward from the bar, his face flushing red again, but the room was already captivated. Wealthy individuals are inherently drawn to confidence, and I was projecting the absolute authority of a woman who held all the cards. I looked around at the faces of Kendra's elite clients, the gallery owners, and the private investors. Jason is incredibly creative, I continued smoothly. He has always possessed a remarkable talent for storytelling. But I am afraid I cannot take credit for the generous financial contribution he just mentioned. The crowd looked confused. A few people exchanged puzzled glances. I wish I could say that my life savings bought this beautiful marble floor, I said, raising my glass in a mock toast. But I cannot. Because the $240,000 used to secure the down payment on this house does not belong to me. It belongs to the United States federal government. The reaction was instantaneous and electric. The wealthy elite do not fear much, but they share a universal primal terror of the Internal Revenue Service and the federal government. The collective gasp that rippled through the living room was audible. Guests immediately stopped drinking. Several investors instinctively took a physical step back from Jason, treating him as if he had suddenly contracted a highly contagious disease. The murmurs erupted into harsh, urgent whispers. Jason turned the color of old parchment. The heavy sheen of sweat on his forehead seemed to instantly turn ice cold. He opened his mouth, but only a dry, pathetic croak escaped. He let go of Kendra's waist, his hands dropping to his sides as the reality of my public declaration slammed into him. My mother Brenda let out a sharp, indignant squawk, nearly spilling her reserve wine. "Riley, stop this nonsense right now," she demanded, her voice shrill and desperate. "You are embarrassing your brother in front of his important friends." "I am simply clarifying the public record, Mom," I replied, without breaking eye contact with Jason. "You see, everyone here was just told that I am a lonely bookkeeper. But that is another one of Jason's creative stories. I am a corporate forensic accountant. I manage massive federal tax escrow accounts for enterprise clients. The money Jason used to buy this property was an unauthorized wire transfer pulled directly from a federal holding account under my professional jurisdiction." The murmurs in the room escalated into outright panic. An older man holding a Scotch glass, one of the investors Jason had been trying to impress all night, aggressively set his drink down on a side table. "Are you saying this house was purchased with stolen federal funds?" he demanded, his voice laced with absolute fury. Jason scrambled, his hands raised in a pathetic gesture of surrender. "No, no, it is a misunderstanding," Jason stammered, his voice cracking violently. "She is lying. She is just jealous. It was a family loan. I have the paperwork." "Yes, you do have the paperwork," I agreed pleasantly. "You signed a legally binding declaration of receipt yesterday morning at a coffee shop. That document, along with the forged digital authorization logs and the interstate wire routing numbers, was securely transmitted to the federal authorities exactly 36 hours ago." Jason stared at me, his eyes wide with a horrific realization. He finally understood that the piece of paper he had arrogantly signed was not a tax shield, but a fully documented confession. The trap had not just snapped shut. It had buried him entirely. He was a cornered criminal standing in the middle of a massive fraud that was about to be exposed to the world. Jason stared at me for 3 seconds before his shock mutated into explosive rage. The pale terror on his face vanished, replaced by a flush of angry crimson. He lunged forward, closing the distance in 2 strides. He reached out and snatched the champagne flute from my hand, hurling it onto the Persian rug, where it shattered. "She is insane!" Jason screamed, spinning to face the crowd. His voice cracked with panic, echoing loudly off the vaulted ceilings. "Do not listen to a single word this lunatic says. She is having a severe psychotic break right in front of us. She has been jealous of my success for my entire life, and now she is trying to ruin my party with fabricated delusions." The guests did not look convinced. A few older private equity investors were discreetly walking toward the coat check, eager to distance themselves from the disaster. My mother, sensing the illusion collapsing, rushed forward to join Jason. Security Brenda shrieked, waving her arms frantically at the valet staff. Grab her right now and throw her out of this house immediately. My daughter is mentally unwell and forgot her medication today. Someone call the police to escort her off the property before she hurts somebody. I did not move an inch or break my calm posture. I looked at the shattered crystal and then up at my brother. You do not need to call the police, Mom, I said, my voice cutting through their hysterical screaming with chilling calm. I already took care of that phone call for you. Jason took another step toward me, his hands balled into tight fists. You are bluffing, he hissed, his breath hot as he tried to intimidate me. You are bluffing because you are a pathetic woman who cannot stand seeing me win. There is no federal investigation. There is no wire fraud or stolen tax money. I am the chief executive officer of a multi-million-dollar firm, and you are just a bitter accountant trying to steal my spotlight. He raised his right arm, pointing a trembling finger between my eyes, preparing to deliver another string of desperate lies to the audience. But the words never left his throat, because at that exact second, the ambient lighting in the sprawling living room abruptly shifted. The soft glow of the massive crystal chandelier was suddenly overpowered by a blinding glare from outside. Piercing flashes of brilliant red and electric blue cut directly through the darkness of the Calabasas night, illuminating the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the front driveway. The vibrant colors danced rapidly across the marble floors, painting Jason's terrified face in alternating shades of crimson and blue. Then came the terrifying sound. It was not the purr of luxury sedans arriving to drop off wealthy guests. It was the aggressive roar of heavy-duty tactical engines accelerating hard. The elite guests gasped in unison and scrambled backward away from the glass, spilling champagne on their designer clothing. The sharp screech of thick tires echoed loudly as multiple vehicles swerved off the paved driveway. I could hear the sickening crunch of heavy metal tearing directly through the manicured lawn, crushing my mother's prized imported rose bushes into the dirt. 4 massive matte black tactical sport utility vehicles slammed to a halt directly in front of the porch, aggressively boxing in the parked sports cars. The heavy doors flew open simultaneously with terrifying precision. The dull thud of combat boots hitting the pavement resonated clearly through the thick glass windows. Inside the house, total chaos erupted. The musicians abandoned their instruments on the floor, shrinking back in fear against the dining room wall. Kendra let out a high whimper, taking a staggering step backward until her spine hit the catered bar. She clutched the fabric of her emerald green gown, her eyes wide with absolute horror, as she stared out the windows. She knew exactly what those flashing lights meant. Her lucrative career, her pristine reputation, and her very freedom were sitting in the crosshairs of a massive federal raid. Jason stood completely paralyzed in the center of the Persian rug. His arm was still raised, pointing uselessly at me, but his hand was shaking so violently he looked like he was having a medical emergency. He slowly lowered his arm, his jaw dropping open as he turned his head toward the front entryway. The heavy, terrified silence inside the luxury estate was suddenly shattered by a sound that would haunt his nightmares for the rest of his natural life. It was a brutal, thunderous hammering against the custom oak front doors. It was not a polite, neighborly knock. It was the heavy, authoritative pounding of federal agents demanding entry, signaling the absolute and violent end of Jason's stolen empire. Before anyone could even breathe, the heavy oak doors were forced open with a resounding crack that splintered the expensive wood frame. A flood of armed men and women poured into the grand foyer, their boots echoing like a military drumbeat against the imported marble. They moved with terrifying speed and absolute precision, fanning out across the massive living room to secure every possible exit. The bold yellow letters printed across the backs of their dark windbreakers confirmed my brother's worst nightmare. FBI and IRS criminal investigation. They did not look like local police officers responding to a noise complaint. They looked like an unstoppable force of nature designed to completely dismantle and destroy arrogant white-collar criminals. I took a slow, deliberate step backward, smoothly removing myself from the center of the Persian rug and melting into the shadows near the patio doors. I calmly placed my empty champagne flute onto a nearby console table, brushing an invisible speck of dust off the lapel of my tailored charcoal suit. I had spent weeks meticulously building the digital trap that led these agents to this exact address, and I was going to comfortably watch the final act unfold without a single drop of sweat on my brow. I did not want to accidentally interfere with the execution of a federal warrant. A tall, broad-shouldered man with closely cropped gray hair stepped forward from the tactical formation. He held up a thick leather folder containing a stack of official documents bearing the seal of a federal judge. His voice boomed across the silent, terrified room, cutting through the ambient panic with practiced authority. Federal agents, the lead agent shouted, ensuring every single person in the massive house heard him clearly. We are executing a federal search and seizure warrant for this property registered to Jason Corporate LLC. We also have active arrest warrants for Jason and Brenda on charges of federal wire fraud, identity theft, and money laundering. Everyone who does not live here needs to set down their drinks, leave their personal belongings where they are, and proceed slowly toward the front door for identification processing. The clear verbal command acted like a powerful starter pistol for the wealthy elite. The sheer panic of being associated with a high-profile federal raid instantly overrode any social etiquette or loyalty they might have felt toward Kendra. These were people whose entire livelihoods depended on pristine public reputations. The thought of their names appearing on a federal subpoena or being photographed by the press leaving a raided house was completely unacceptable. The sophisticated housewarming party instantly devolved into a frantic, chaotic stampede. Men and women who usually prided themselves on their refined composure were suddenly shoving each other out of the way, desperate to escape the blast radius of Jason's massive financial crimes. They knew that federal investigations were like black holes relentlessly pulling in anyone who stood too close to the center of the fraud. Crystal champagne flutes slipped from trembling fingers, shattering against the expensive marble floors and soaking the imported rugs. The string quartet practically sprinted past the catering tables, leaving their antique cellos and violins leaning carelessly against the walls. The powerful private equity investors, who had been slapping Jason on the back just minutes ago, now aggressively pushed their way toward the grand entryway, completely ignoring his desperate pleas for them to wait. Kendra's elite art clients, women wearing emerald necklaces and designer gowns, hiked up their skirts and hurried out the door, shielding their faces with their expensive clutches as if the paparazzi were already waiting outside. Jason reached out, grabbing the sleeve of a wealthy real estate developer he had been trying to court all night. "Please," Jason begged, his voice cracking with sheer terror. "You have to tell them I am legitimate. Tell them about my startup." The developer violently yanked his arm away, shooting Jason a look of absolute disgust before practically running out the shattered front door. Kendra stood frozen near the catering bar, watching her entire professional network evaporate in less than 60 seconds. She tried to catch the eye of a prominent gallery owner she had mentored, but the woman looked right through her, speeding past without a single word of comfort. Within 3 minutes, the sprawling living room was completely emptied of its high society guests. The only people left standing in the center of the glittering wreckage were my brother, my mother, my father, and Kendra. They were entirely stripped of their wealthy audience, leaving them utterly exposed to the harsh, unforgiving reality of the federal justice system. The lead agent gave a sharp nod, and 4 agents stepped forward, pulling heavy steel handcuffs from their tactical belts. The illusion of the golden child was officially dead. 2 agents immediately advanced toward my mother. Brenda took a frantic step backward, her expensive designer dress swishing against her legs. She held up her hands as if she could physically wave away the federal government. "You cannot do this!" she shrieked, her voice reaching an unbearable pitch. "I am a respected member of this community. I am a mother. There has been a terrible mistake. I am completely innocent." The taller of the 2 agents did not even blink. He grasped her wrist firmly, swiftly twisting her arm behind her back. Brenda let out a piercing scream of genuine shock as the heavy steel handcuffs snapped shut around her wrists, locking with a sharp metallic click. "Brenda Wilson," the agent stated in a flat, clinical tone, "you are under arrest for federal wire fraud and aggravated identity theft. You have the right to remain silent. I highly suggest you use it right now." My mother dissolved into a puddle of hysterical tears, her carefully styled hair falling into her face as she sobbed uncontrollably. She was instantly reduced from a high society matriarch to a common criminal whining about her tight bracelets. Jason watched his mother get cuffed, his eyes bulging with absolute terror. The reality of a federal prison sentence finally shattered his grand delusions. Instead of facing the consequences like a man, the golden child did what he had always done when things got difficult. He ran. He spun on his heel, his expensive leather shoes slipping frantically on the polished marble floor. He sprinted toward the open patio doors located just a few feet away from where I was quietly standing in the shadows. He moved with the desperate, uncoordinated panic of a hunted animal, knocking over a side table and sending a heavy floral arrangement crashing to the ground. "Jason, stop right there," a tactical agent yelled, drawing a heavy black taser from his belt and breaking into a dead sprint after him. Jason burst through the glass doors and stumbled onto the expansive stone patio. He was running blindly toward the manicured edge of the sprawling backyard, perhaps believing he could somehow disappear into the dark Calabasas hills. But he was wearing a tight tailored suit and smooth-bottomed dress shoes. As he reached the edge of the glowing infinity pool, his right foot violently lost traction on the damp stone. He flailed his arms wildly, desperately, trying to regain his balance. The pursuing federal agent did not hesitate for a single second. He launched himself forward, wrapping his thick, muscular arms tightly around Jason's waist. The sheer forward momentum carried them both right over the edge. With a massive, spectacular splash, my brother and the tactical agent plunged directly into the deep end of the illuminated swimming pool. The water violently churned over the bright underwater lights. A second later, Jason broke the surface, gasping and sputtering loudly for air, his perfectly styled hair plastered flat to his forehead. His luxurious custom blazer was ruined, dragging him down like a heavy soaked anchor. The agent, entirely unfazed by the cold water, aggressively shoved Jason toward the shallow stone steps. "Move," the agent commanded, hauling Jason out of the pool by the collar of his expensive, soaking wet shirt. Jason crawled onto the wet patio stones on his hands and knees, coughing up chlorinated water and shivering uncontrollably in the night air. The agent yanked Jason's arms behind his back, forcing his face down against the hard, wet concrete. The metallic ratcheting sound of the handcuffs echoed loudly across the silent backyard. "Jason Wilson, you are under federal arrest for money laundering and asset concealment," the agent recited loudly over my brother's pathetic sobbing. Inside the living room, my father watched his entire legacy disintegrate. Thomas stood paralyzed near the catered bar, his mouth hanging wide open in sheer disbelief. As he watched his only son being dragged, dripping wet and handcuffed across the patio, all the color drained from his face. He let out a strange wheeze and suddenly grabbed the center of his chest. His knees buckled beneath him. He collapsed backward, landing heavily onto the white leather sofa. An agent rushed over to check his pulse and call for medical help on the radio. Thomas was not having a fatal heart attack, but he was experiencing a massive, debilitating panic attack as his entire world collapsed around him. Kendra stood frozen near the shattered glass, her arms wrapped tightly around her own waist, staring at the absolute destruction of her short marriage. I remained exactly where I was, watching the scene unfold with absolute emotional detachment. The loud shrieks of my mother, the pathetic shivering of my brother, and the heavy breathing of my father filled the room. It was over. But the federal government was not quite finished. While the initial shock of the arrests paralyzed my family, the rest of the tactical team shifted into their secondary objective with ruthless efficiency. Agents carrying thick rolls of bright orange and neon green tape spread out across the sprawling first floor. They began slapping massive federal seizure notices onto the mahogany walls, the custom marble countertops, and the heavy glass doors. Each sticker bore the intimidating seal of the United States Department of Justice, legally branding the luxury estate as confiscated government property. Kendra watched the systematic dismantling of her glamorous new life in absolute silence, until an agent wearing thick black tactical gloves approached the formal dining area. He walked directly toward a stunning modern abstract painting hanging above the catered buffet. It was a piece Kendra had proudly displayed a multi-million-dollar canvas she was actively brokering for an elite European client. The agent unceremoniously grabbed the heavy gilded frame and began lifting it off the reinforced wall hooks. "Wait!" Kendra shouted, her voice trembling violently as she finally broke her paralyzed stance. She rushed forward, her emerald green evening gown dragging across the wet marble floor. "You cannot touch that piece of art. That painting does not belong to Jason. It is part of my professional inventory. I am a licensed art broker, and that canvas is on loan from a private gallery in London. It has absolutely nothing to do with this house or his bank accounts." The lead agent. The tall man with the graying hair stepped directly into her path, physically blocking her from reaching the artwork. He looked at her with the cold, clinical detachment of a man who had dismantled hundreds of criminal enterprises. "Are you Kendra Wilson, the legally wedded wife of the primary suspect?" he asked, his voice echoing loudly in the cavernous room. "Yes," Kendra stammered, wrapping her arms tightly around her waist again. "But my business is entirely separate. I keep my finances completely isolated from his. I did not know anything about the stolen tax funds. You have to leave my professional inventory alone. If you seize that painting, my career is completely ruined. I will be sued into absolute bankruptcy." The lead agent did not flinch or offer a single ounce of sympathy. "Ignorance of the crime does not grant you immunity from the severe consequences, Mrs. Wilson," he stated flatly. "Under the strict statutes of federal civil asset forfeiture, any high-value items stored inside a property purchased with illicit funds are subject to immediate government seizure. Your husband used stolen federal tax dollars to buy the roof over your head. Therefore, the government currently views your multi-million-dollar art inventory as co-mingled assets and potential instruments of money laundering." Kendra gasped, stepping backward as if she had just been physically struck. The agent holding the abstract painting successfully unhooked it from the wall, carefully wrapping it in protective plastic before carrying it out the shattered front door. Another team of agents was already moving into the adjacent sitting room, placing federal evidence tags on imported sculptures and antique vases she had meticulously curated. Every piece of her professional credibility was being loaded into government trucks. "You are stripping my entire life away," Kendra whispered, tears of pure panic finally spilling down her perfectly contoured cheeks. "I have absolutely nothing to do with his crimes. I am a victim here." "You are the spouse of an indicted federal criminal," the lead agent corrected sharply. "We are freezing your personal banking accounts and seizing your business licenses pending a full forensic audit of your marital assets. If you want to prove your innocence, I suggest you hire a competent defense attorney immediately. But right now, this property and everything in it belongs to the Internal Revenue Service." The lead agent turned his attention away from her and addressed the entire room. He looked at my father, who was still gasping for breath on the white leather sofa, and then at my mother, who was sitting handcuffed in a dining chair, sobbing uncontrollably. "Listen up," the lead agent announced, his voice booming with absolute finality. "The warrant covers the immediate seizure of this estate and all physical contents within its property lines. That includes the luxury vehicles parked in the driveway, the jewelry currently inside the safes, and every single piece of furniture. You have exactly 10 minutes to gather your coats and whatever identification you have in your pockets. After that, anyone who is not in handcuffs will be forcefully escorted off the premises. You are officially evicted." Kendra looked around the massive living room, her eyes wide with total despair. She walked into this house tonight as a queen. Now she was absolutely ruined. The 10 minutes evaporated in a blur of frantic movement and agonizing humiliation. The federal agents did not offer any extensions. When the deadline hit, they physically herded the remaining occupants toward the grand entryway. I walked out voluntarily, my hands resting comfortably in the pockets of my tailored suit. The cool night air of Calabasas was a sharp contrast to the suffocating panic inside the seized estate. The driveway was a chaotic scene illuminated entirely by the aggressive strobing red and blue lights of the tactical vehicles. Neighbors from the surrounding mansions had spilled out onto their manicured lawns, recording the spectacular downfall of Jason Corporate LLC. My brother was standing near the back of a black sport utility vehicle. He was still dripping wet from his unexpected swim in the infinity pool, shivering violently in the cool breeze. His hands were secured tightly behind his back, and a federal agent stood closely guarding him. My mother was placed into the back of a separate cruiser, her mascara running down her face in dark, jagged streams. Paramedics had arrived for my father, helping him into the back of an ambulance to monitor his panic attack. Then Kendra walked out the front door. She had managed to grab her designer trench coat, wrapping it tightly over her emerald green evening gown. She carried a small leather clutch containing her identification but nothing else. Every piece of jewelry, every designer shoe, every valuable asset she brought into that marriage was left behind, locked inside the federal crime scene. She walked slowly down the front steps, her heels clicking sharply against the concrete. When she saw the neighbors filming her, the sheer humiliation finally broke whatever restraint she had left. She marched directly toward the black vehicle where Jason was standing. The guarding agent stepped forward to intercept her, but Kendra ignored him, her eyes locked entirely on the man who had destroyed her life. Jason looked up at her, his teeth chattering, his soaked hair plastered to his skull. He looked absolutely pathetic. "Kendra?" He stammered, his voice weak and trembling. "Babe, please call my lawyer. Tell him it is a misunderstanding. Tell him to post bail. I can fix this. I promise I can fix this." Kendra did not say a word at first. She simply stared at him, her chest heaving with a mixture of absolute disgust and raw fury. She raised her left hand and grabbed the massive 5-carat diamond engagement ring he had proposed with. The ring she had proudly flaunted to all her elite clients. With a sharp, violent yank, she pulled the ring off her finger. "You cannot fix anything, you pathetic fraud," Kendra screamed, her voice echoing down the entire suburban street. She threw the heavy diamond ring directly at his face. The precious metal struck Jason hard on the cheekbone before bouncing off and clattering uselessly onto the paved driveway. "You stole my reputation. You stole my future. Do not you ever contact me again. I am filing for an annulment tomorrow morning, and I hope they lock you in a federal cell for the rest of your miserable life." Jason flinched, turning his face away as the ring hit him, but he could not raise his hands to protect himself. He just stood there crying as Kendra completely eviscerated him in front of the federal agents and the neighborhood. Kendra spun around, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Her eyes scanned the driveway until they landed on me. I was standing near the edge of the property line, watching the entire spectacle with absolute calm. The anger in her eyes instantly vanished, replaced by a frantic, desperate terror. She practically ran over to me, grabbing my forearm with her trembling hands. "Riley, please," Kendra begged, her voice dropping to a frantic whisper. "You know I had nothing to do with this. You are a forensic accountant. You have all the data. You can trace the funds and prove that my business accounts were completely isolated from his money laundering. Please, Riley. I will pay whatever your firm charges. I will do anything. You have to help me legally detach my name from his crimes before the government seizes my gallery." I looked down at her, hands gripping my sleeve. I felt no pity for the woman who had mocked my clothes and encouraged my brother to spend stolen money. I gently but firmly pulled my arm out of her grasp, taking a deliberate step back. "You told me to stop hoarding pennies," I said, my voice cold and entirely devoid of sympathy. "Start hoarding yours, Kendra. You need them for a defense attorney." I turned my back on her, leaving her standing alone in the driveway, and walked to my car. A full week passed since the flashing red and blue lights illuminated the Calabasas driveway. The dust had settled, but the devastation was absolute. I was sitting at my sleek glass desk in my downtown Los Angeles office, reviewing a completely unrelated corporate audit. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long geometric shadows across the pristine white carpet. My environment was the absolute picture of control and stability. The chaotic noise of my family was completely absent. My lawyer had informed me that Jason and my mother were denied bail due to the sheer magnitude of the stolen federal funds and their clear flight risk. They were currently sitting in federal holding cells, waiting for their arraignment. My office phone began to ring. It was an unfamiliar local number, but my instincts told me exactly who was calling. I let it ring 4 times, allowing the tension to build before I calmly pressed the speaker button. "Hello," I said, my voice perfectly level. Riley, a broken voice, gasped. It was my father. But he did not sound like the arrogant patriarch who had grabbed my arm in the grand foyer a week ago. He sounded incredibly old, fragile, and entirely shattered. He was hyperventilating, his breath hitching as violent sobs racked his chest. "Riley, please do not hang up on me. You have to listen to me. I am begging you." I leaned back in my ergonomic chair. "I am listening, Thomas," I replied deliberately, using his first name to establish the permanent severing of our familial bond. He choked out a wet, pathetic sob. "I just got back from the federal detention center. I had to talk to your mother through a thick pane of reinforced glass. She is wearing a hideous orange jumpsuit, Riley. They are treating her like a common thug. And Jason looks absolutely terrified. The other inmates are harassing him. He is just a boy, Riley. He does not belong in a place like that." "Jason is 30 years old," I corrected smoothly. "He is a grown man who made a conscious decision to steal $250,000 from the United States government. It was a mistake," Thomas wailed, his voice cracking with desperation. "It was a stupid mistake to impress that awful woman he married. But they are your family, Riley. They are your own flesh and blood. You have proved your point. You won. Now please, you have to call those federal agents and tell them to drop the charges. Tell them it was a big misunderstanding. Tell them you authorized the transfer and we will pay the government back over time." The sheer level of delusion required to formulate that request was staggering. My father actually believed that a massive federal criminal indictment was a simple family dispute that could be magically erased with a single phone call. He thought the Federal Bureau of Investigation operated like a neighborhood homeowner association. "I cannot drop the charges," I explained, speaking to him as if I were addressing a slow child. "I am not the plaintiff. The United States Department of Justice is the plaintiff. I am simply the forensic accountant who handed them the undeniable proof of a massive financial crime. The machine is already moving, Thomas. I could not stop it even if I wanted to." "You are not even trying," he screamed suddenly, shifting from pathetic begging to aggressive manipulation. "You always hated Jason. You were always jealous of the attention your mother and I gave him. We provided for you. We gave you a roof over your head and food on the table. We gave you our family name. And this is how you repay us. You are destroying our bloodline, Riley. You are wiping out our legacy because you are a bitter, vindictive spinster." I let him hurl every single toxic insult he had stored in his arsenal. I listened to the frantic gasps of a man realizing his golden child was never going to save him. "If Jason goes to federal prison, our family is completely dead," Thomas sobbed, his anger quickly collapsing back into absolute despair. "I will lose everything. The legal fees are already draining my retirement accounts. I am going to have to sell my house. You are ruining my life, Riley. You are sending your own mother to a concrete cell. How can you sleep at night knowing you did this to your own family?" His words were designed to pierce my conscience and trigger decades of conditioned guilt. But as I sat in my quiet, sunlit office looking out over the sprawling city skyline, I felt absolutely nothing. The emotional manipulation that had controlled me for 33 years was completely powerless. He was crying for a legacy that never actually existed, built entirely on lies, theft, and my silent suffering. Thomas gasped for air, his ragged breathing echoing loudly through the speakerphone. I let the silence stretch across the line, allowing him to sit in the uncomfortable void where my apologies and capitulations used to live. For my entire life, this exact silence was my cue to grovel. It was the moment I was supposed to rush in, absorb his anger, and offer my own resources to fix whatever disaster Jason had created. But today the silence just hung there, cold and heavy. "I am not destroying this family, Thomas. I finally said, my voice dropping to a low, steady cadence. This family destroyed itself the moment you decided my bank accounts were a free pass for your favorite son. You did not provide for me. I provided for myself, despite the constant financial and emotional drain you all placed on my life. You demanded I subsidize a lifestyle you could not afford, and when I finally closed the vault, you resorted to federal theft. He tried to interrupt, his voice pitching upward in panic, but I cut him off sharply. Do not speak, I commanded, the sheer authority in my voice, forcing him into a stunned silence. You are going to listen to me now. You are crying about your legal fees and your retirement accounts. But you never once considered the 10 years in federal prison I would have faced if the Internal Revenue Service thought I was complicit in that wire fraud. You were perfectly willing to let me take the fall if it meant Jason got his mansion and his fake tech empire. You were ready to sacrifice my freedom on the altar of his fragile ego. But he is your brother, Thomas whimpered, the fight completely draining out of him, leaving only a pathetic, broken old man. We are blood. Blood does not forge digital signatures to steal $250,000, I shot back. Blood does not parade a stolen house in front of elite society, while mocking the person who actually earned the money. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the cool glass surface of my desk. I wanted my next words to brand themselves permanently into his mind. I wanted him to hear them echoing in his empty house for the rest of his miserable life. I did not press charges, Dad, I stated clearly, enunciating every single syllable. The federal government did. You enabled a thief because you loved the golden child more than the truth. You built a fantasy world, and now the bill has finally come due. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line, a final desperate attempt to formulate an excuse or a plea for mercy. Enjoy the ashes, I said. I reached out and pressed the red button on the console, disconnecting the call. The dial tone purred for a split second before the line went completely dead. I picked up my personal cell phone, navigated to the carrier settings, and manually entered my father's phone number into the blocked contacts list. I added my mother's cell phone number. I added Jason's number. I added the numbers for the Malibu rental property, the country club, and the local bail bondsman. I systematically severed every possible digital and telephonic connection to my former family. There would be no tearful reunions in a sterile prison visitation room. There would be no dramatic reconciliations or toxic forgiveness. The bridge was not just burned, it was completely vaporized. I would gladly comply with any federal subpoenas to testify in court, but outside of the witness stand, I was permanently done. I sat back in my chair, taking a deep, slow breath. For the first time in 33 years, my chest felt incredibly light. The crushing weight of their expectations, their entitlement, and their constant belittling was entirely gone. I looked around my pristine office. I had built this beautiful life with my own hands. I had earned my corporate title, my pristine credit score, and my absolute financial independence through sheer grit and unmatched competence. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city of Los Angeles hummed with vibrant energy. Millions of people were going about their daily lives completely unaware of the massive federal implosion that had just occurred in Calabasas. Jason was going to face a ruthless federal judge. Brenda was going to face a jury of her peers. Kendra was going to face the utter ruin of her professional reputation. And Thomas was going to face the rest of his life completely alone, in a house he could no longer afford. They wanted to treat me like a mindless bank. They forgot that banks have ruthless security protocols, and when you try to rob the vault, the heavy steel doors lock you inside. I turned my attention back to the corporate audit glowing brightly on my high-resolution computer monitors. I had a major client meeting in 15 minutes and a multi-million-dollar corporate merger to review. My career was accelerating rapidly. My future was completely unwritten, and for the very first time it belonged entirely to me. I picked up my pen, ready to get back to work. 6 months passed with the rapid efficiency of a perfectly balanced ledger. The federal justice system moves slowly during the investigation phase, but once the indictments are unsealed, it drops like a heavy iron guillotine. I did not attend the sentencing hearings in person. I simply read the official court transcripts forwarded to my secure email by the prosecuting attorneys. Reading the court reporter's sterile typed words provided a much deeper psychological satisfaction than sitting on a hard wooden gallery bench. The absolute destruction of Jason Corporate LLC was swift and entirely unmerciful. Jason stood before a no-nonsense federal judge in a downtown Los Angeles courtroom. His custom-tailored blazers and designer watches were completely gone. He was wearing the standard-issue drab uniform of a federal inmate awaiting transfer, his wrists secured to a waist chain. According to the transcripts, he tried one last desperate time to charm the court. He used his hollow tech buzzwords talking about market disruption and temporary liquidity crises. He actually attempted to convince a federal judge that the stolen funds were just early-stage venture capital. The judge cut him off mid-sentence, noting that stealing $250,000 from the Internal Revenue Service was not a disruptive startup strategy. It was a blatant felony. The gavel fell with a resounding crack that echoed through the empty gallery. Jason was sentenced to a mandatory 60 months in a federal correctional institution, 5 straight years. There is no early parole for white-collar crimes of that magnitude in the federal system. The arrogant golden child who had never worked a hard day in his life was now facing a daily regimen of scheduled head counts, metal toilets, and forced manual labor for pennies an hour. His illusion of dominance was locked inside a concrete box. My mother Brenda managed to avoid joining him behind bars, but her punishment was arguably more agonizing for a woman obsessed with superficial social status. Terrified by the looming prospect of a federal prison sentence, she eagerly accepted a brutal plea deal offered by the prosecution. To satisfy the strict terms of her probation and the massive court-ordered restitution, Brenda had to liquidate absolutely everything. She surrendered her retirement pension, her meager savings, and the remaining equity she and my father had in their home. At 60 years old, the woman who used to sneer at my practical wardrobe was forced to enter the minimum wage workforce just to survive. I received a brief update from a former neighbor who spotted her last month. Brenda now works as a cashier at a massive discount retail store in the San Fernando Valley. She wears a stiff blue polyester vest and a cheap plastic name tag. She spends 8 excruciating hours a day standing on hard linoleum floors, scanning discounted groceries, and bagging cheap plastic goods. The ultimate poetic justice is that she frequently has to ring up the exact same wealthy country club women she spent decades trying to impress. They do not make eye contact with her anymore. They simply take their long paper receipts and walk away, leaving her trapped in a prison of her own public humiliation. Her aching feet and her minimum wage paychecks are a daily reminder of the federal crime she committed. Kendra executed her escape plan with the ruthless precision I always knew she possessed. The morning after the Calabasas raid, she filed an emergency petition for a legal annulment, citing massive financial fraud and criminal deception. A judge granted it rapidly, legally severing her from Jason before his ink was even dry on the federal fingerprint cards. But while she escaped the direct criminal charges, she could not escape the radioactive professional fallout. The federal seizure of her high-value art inventory made national industry news. In the elite luxury art market, reputation and discretion are the only currencies that actually matter. Her high-net-worth clients abandoned her immediately. Nobody wants a broker whose name is permanently attached to a federal money laundering indictment. The major galleries in Los Angeles and New York blacklisted her overnight, refusing to return her phone calls or answer her emails. Stripped of her seized inventory and her elite network, Kendra packed whatever she could fit into 2 designer suitcases and fled the United States entirely. Rumor had it she relocated to a minor secondary market in Eastern Europe, desperately trying to rebuild her shattered career from the absolute bottom. She went from hosting million-dollar champagne parties in Calabasas mansions to authenticating cheap estate sale paintings in total obscurity. As for my father Thomas, he retreated into complete isolation. The exorbitant legal fees bankrupted him, leaving him renting a small, dark apartment far away from the coastal ocean breezes he loved. His grand legacy was entirely reduced to a son behind bars and a wife scanning barcodes. The toxic dynamic that had suffocated me for over 3 decades was finally extinguished. They had gambled everything they had to maintain a pathetic lie, and the house always wins. Exactly 1 year later, I stood at the head of a massive polished mahogany table in the center of a high-rise boardroom. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the biting wind of a brutal Chicago winter whipped off Lake Michigan. But inside my corner office, the climate was perfectly controlled and incredibly warm. The frosted glass double doors at the entrance of the suite bore my name in sleek silver lettering, Riley Corporate Forensics. I was no longer just a senior associate managing enterprise accounts for a faceless firm. I was the founder and chief executive officer of my own highly successful agency. The massive void left by severing my toxic family had created the exact space I needed to build my own empire. Leaving Los Angeles was the best strategic maneuver I ever executed. The West Coast was tainted by the memories of their endless demands and the suffocating pressure of my father's expectations. Chicago offered a pristine landscape. It was a city built on hard work and undeniable reality, a place where substance always mattered more than superficial optics. In the past 12 months, my new firm had secured exclusive contracts with 3 major Fortune 500 companies. We specialized in untangling massive corporate fraud, corporate espionage, and recovering stolen assets. Every time I uncovered a hidden offshore account or exposed a corrupt executive, I felt a profound sense of vindication. I had turned the absolute worst betrayal of my life into a highly lucrative and deeply empowering career. I was respected, feared, and completely untouchable. I walked over to the expansive window and looked down at the bustling city streets below. The tiny cars moved in organized lines, completely unaware of the complex financial ecosystems operating in the glass towers above them. In the world of high finance, we have a term called the sunk cost fallacy. It is the dangerous psychological trap where a person continues to invest heavily in a failing asset simply because they have already committed so much time and money to it. They keep pouring fresh capital into a dying venture, hoping it will magically turn around and become profitable. For 33 years, my family was my absolute worst sunk cost. I kept investing my loyalty, my money, and my sanity into a dynamic that was completely and utterly bankrupt. I kept waiting for a return on my investment. I kept hoping for a single ounce of genuine respect or unconditional love that was never going to come. But toxic people are not just bad investments. They are active black holes. They do not just fail to yield returns, they violently consume everything you build. Cutting out the infection of my toxic mother, my enabling father, and my narcissistic brother was not a tragedy. It was the greatest, most profitable investment I ever made. The moment I stopped subsidizing their grand delusions, my entire life skyrocketed. I stopped paying the massive emotional tax of their constant approval seeking. I stopped carrying the heavy mortgage of their manufactured daily crises. I liquidated the fake family unit and kept the only asset that actually had any real value, which was my own undeniable competence and peace of mind. For decades, they looked at me and saw a weak, submissive target. They saw a quiet girl who wore practical clothes and worked long hours in a sterile cubicle. They saw a glorified piggy bank they could smash open whenever Jason needed to fund his next spectacular failure. They assumed my refusal to scream and throw dramatic tantrums meant I was completely powerless against them. They mistook my professional boundaries for a challenge, and my quiet patience for absolute submission. But they fundamentally misunderstood the nature of my profession and the architecture of my mind. They thought my silence was weakness. They did not know it was an audit. I was always watching. I was always calculating the exact deficit of their actions. And when the math finally demanded a complete liquidation, I did not hesitate to close their accounts permanently. I let them steal the rope they desperately wanted, and I simply stood back and watched them tie their own perfect knot. They destroyed themselves because they lacked the one thing you absolutely need to survive in the real world: accountability. I turned away from the window and looked directly at the professional camera setup on my desk, prepared to record the final segment for my corporate podcast. I leaned forward, resting my hands confidently on the pristine leather desk pad. Sometimes the hardest thing you will ever do is watch people you care about walk directly into a fire of their own making. But sometimes it is the absolute only way to save yourself from burning to ashes right along with them. You cannot heal a deep infection by pretending it is a beauty mark. You have to cut it out completely. Have you ever had to walk away and let someone's bad choices destroy them? Tell me your story in the comments. Like and subscribe for more.